Morning, everybody. This is your geography lesson for the beginning the 18th of May. And this week's work is due for this Thursday, the 21st of May. We'd like to complete all of your answers in your note set, which will return to you. First thing I'd ask you all to do is please go through last week's feedback for the questions you did, look at the marks you got, and pay attention to the model answers that you were given that shows you what you should have written. Especially if you weren't getting full marks. But even if you were getting full marks, you see what me and Mr. Anderson are recommending that you write in response to those questions. In this week's work, there is one key exam question, which we will be marking as an exam question would be marked, and you'll get feedback on that. And most of this week's work is going to focus on continuing to develop your knowledge of synoptic weather maps, but we're also going to start having a little think about high pressure as well, because a lot of the last few weeks lessons have primarily focused on low pressure. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing you can do is in your virtual set, I'd like you to turn to the using synoptic weather symbols to describe the weather. And if you have a little look at that, that's where you should be starting the lesson. Now, at this point, what I'd like you to do is let's just quickly reflect. What have we done so far? If we just review what you were being asked to do the last few weeks, you're being introduced to a couple of key ideas. You've been introduced to the idea of these lines being called isobars, and they tell you about the air pressure of an area, whether it is low or high. They tell you the direction of the wind is moving, which is influenced by whether it's high or low pressure. And we also know that wind follows these isobars, either in a clockwise direction if it's high pressure and an anti-clockwise if it's low pressure. We also now know about these two things called weather fronts. We have the warm front, which is the red with little semicircles, and they tell us the direction it's actually moving. And we have the blue, which is the cold front, which tells us that it's a different type of weather and moving in the direction that these little blue triangles are moving. In between these two fronts, the warm and the cold, we have this area of warm air known as the warm sector, and this is a warm air mass. Either side, we've got cold air. Right, you were also then shown how to apply that to specific exam questions. So you had this step one question, which was, can you tell me the difference in the weather between London and Glasgow? And you will have been given some feedback on those two questions. And you had to base that on your knowledge of isobars, the type of air pressure present in the location, and the weather fronts that would be sitting there. Okay, and Manchester was done for you. So you'll have had that marked. You were then asked, the next stage was thinking about the fact that weather fronts move. So whilst we can see Glasgow right now is in this area of cold air, has no weather front sitting on top of it, because warm fronts and cold fronts tend to move from west to east, we know that the weather in Glasgow is going to change. So this question, also marked out of 10, was for you to tell us about those changes, not just how would the weather change. So, for example, warm front would bring steady rain and warming up of temperatures, but also you had to then explain why those changes were happening. So it's not just warming up, it's warming up because of the arrival of the warm sector. Steady rain would be happening because of the arrival of the warm front. Wind direction changes because, and so on. Okay. Right, and that brings us to today's lesson. So we're going to continue with this idea of isobars and weather fronts, but we're going to add a little layer, which is these things called synoptic weather symbols. And the first thing you have to do if we have a look at instructions is you should be this tutorial here, which is a 10-minute tutorial, and it will tell you to answer the questions that you will find on this page. Okay, so you've got 4 questions here. You need to describe the weather on October the 8th and January the 8th, and you need to answer the 2 questions about what's the weather in Liverpool and Cagliari. And these are both describe questions. So you're just telling me based on your knowledge of these synoptic weather symbols. So you need to watch that tutorial 2 questions. So pretty straightforward. What you've then got to do is you're going to then apply these to what I think is probably one of the hardest exam questions you're ever going to face. Okay, it's practicing a key exam question. I've got a full 10-minute tutorial that's going to talk you through how to do this question. Okay, the question that you're actually going to be asked to look at is right here. Okay, practicing exam question step 3. So there is a tutorial. And in this case, it's explaining the difference between Lerwick and Ballycastle. And you've got to bring together your knowledge of synoptic weather symbols we can see here with your knowledge of isobars, of low pressure, which is it's 976 millibars, and water. And bringing all that knowledge together, you will be asked to explain why Ballycastle and Lerwick have different weather. That is a hard question, so you will need the tutorial to do it. We will mark this, and it will be marked out of 8. You'll get marked for each accurate because statement you make. Okay, so I'd suggest at this point you pause the main lesson video and watch. And that brings us to the part of today's lesson, which is weather associated with high pressure. Now, high pressure is what we have been having recently in the UK. It is when the air is sinking, cold is sinking. It means you generally tend to get much clearer skies, and you tend to get much gentler winds. Winds also will be moving in a clockwise direction. One thing you very rarely get, you can, but you're not likely to get, are weather fronts. So you normally won't get weather fronts, and therefore high pressure doesn't normally bring any type of rain. So what we're talking about is clear days, dry days, but, and here's the thing, what time of year is it? Now, you've got a couple of questions and a YouTube link on what actually is a heat wave, what's the classification of a heat wave, then the heat wave, a video on how the heat wave affected last year's heat wave. And I suggest you watch those two. I'm being asked to answer this question. Well, first of all, there is a question here which asks you to answer, read the textbook and answer that particular question there to compare what's the difference in the weather between high pressure anticyclone, which is the name we give to high pressure in the summer and the winter. You've got a couple of photos showing you typically winter high pressure and summer high pressure, and you just have to use the textbook to say what are the differences in the weather. There are some similarities, like have a look at the sky. That's the big similarity. Winds tend to be similar. Wind direction tends to be similar, as well as wind speed. So does cloud cover, but there is a big difference in air pressure, in temperature, and there is a big difference about what happens on the ground. Okay, so describe those differences, and then that brings us to the last bit, which is talking about the effects. Now, the 2 YouTube videos I have attached here will help answer this question. So how would high pressure in summer affect us? And it does say, what are both the advantages and disadvantages? Now, you've done a very similar question in terms of air masses. How would a tropical continental, how would a tropical maritime in winter or summer affect us? Now we're just thinking about air pressure. So if we had high pressure in summer, how's it going to affect us? What's the pros and the cons? Let's think about winter, though. Let's think about days on end, 3-4 days of non-stop high pressure. Well, it's going to mean crystal clear blue skies. Now that means the air is sinking, and we're going to get these frosts on the ground. Now that's terrible for gardeners. You're going to see, when you think about it, plants are going to die in the frost. If there's any growth happening still on trees, that will kill off the leaves finally, and they'll fall off the trees. If you get an early frost, if you get high pressure early on in the season, then or a late frost. So, for example, the farmers have planted their crops, and then you get a sort of frost in April, something like that. Then that can be damage to plants because frost will freeze the plant and kill it. But on the plus side, you get these lovely clear days, which can bring people out to go for walks and enjoy the nice calmer winds and the gentler weather. That's going to be a problem for wind farms because obviously you get very little wind in high pressure systems. It's going to be great for energy companies because everybody's going to be putting their heating on, because one of the prices we pay for high pressure in winter is that the temperatures plummet because there's no cloud cover and therefore the heat all escapes, which means we all have to put our heating systems on. If that goes on for days on end, we can start to see pipes in our homes freeze as water freezes, and that can cause them to burst, which can then lead to flooding. And plumbers are going to benefit, obviously, because they're going to have to be fixing it all. We might see damage to our heating systems in our homes. High pressure is going to cause ice on roads. Puddles are going to freeze because the temperature is going to be very low. That's going to mean it's going to be very icy and therefore dangerous potentially for travel. If you're in a ski resort, it's going to be fantastic, because especially if it's snowed already, because then you're going to get the lovely clear weather and people are going to be able to ski. And if you've ever been in the mountains on a lovely clear day where you can ski on the snow, you'll know how nice that is. The downside is, though, you'll also know that the temperatures tend to be pretty brutally low because the heat's all escaping. So there's some ideas about how to answer this question. The final bit for this week's lesson. I want you to have done that by the 1st of May. So you're looking at kind of 4 questions that make up this week's work. One relying on a textbook, a couple relying on you using tutorials of mine, and then this last one where you'll need to listen to my lesson as well as these 2 videos to help you explain how the weather in high pressure is different at different times of year.